I had a pastor years ago who said once, especially for a man, once he crosses a line and he has hit somebody, not boxing, not that kind of thing, but just really hit them, especially if it's a woman, it's a line that will be forever harder to not cross because they've already gone there. So this idea that if it's happened, it's never going to happen again and I'm going to send her back. Say that a woman gets hit by her husband and they separate and then they get back together and he never hits her again. I'm not sure that there's still not a problem because guess who knows she can't cross a certain line without getting hit? The wife. It's just something is severed and that needs to start being acknowledged.
I'm Todd, and I was naughty. I did everything wrong. I got kicked out of art school, I drank heavily, and I looked to other religions and versions of spirituality to get fulfilled. The problem was, I was in the occult and I didn't even know it. My life was a wreck, and I had to learn what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus.
And I'm Laura. I was super nice. I did everything right. I got saved young, went to Moody Bible Institute, got married, and followed the Christian rules to having a good life. The problem was that formula didn't work. I had to change how I related with Jesus.
At the end of the day, what I learned is the very simple truth. Jesus is the answer, the only answer, and the only one that will ever actually fulfill you.
Naughty versus nice.
And welcome back to Naughty versus Nice. Of course, I'm Todd.
And I'm Laura.
I'm Kelly.
Today we're continuing our series where we're talking about the controversial topic of divorce, and especially within the Christian church and how it sees it. Today's episode, we're going to talk about a very sensitive topic, and we're talking specifically about sexual abuse. We're going to be talking about how this type of abuse shows up in a marriage, shows up behind closed doors, and why it's so difficult to navigate and why it's difficult to talk about, especially within the church. So this is a serious subject, and for those people that have experienced this, we're going to be talking about it. Some of you, it might be best if you just go ahead and skip this episode and jump ahead to the next one. We're not going to pull any punches, and we're just going to say it like it is. So with that, I do want to make this announcement. If there is anyone that's listening to this and they are suffering from domestic violence situation, IPV, I think they call it interpersonal violence, something along those lines, there is a national hotline that is available for you as a resource, and that is 1-800-799-7233. If you're in the United States, that number once again is 1-800-799-7233. It is not okay that you're being harmed, and if you need help, this is a great place to go and the first call that you should make. So with that, we'll go ahead and just kind of jump right in. Laura, this is going to be more your arena. I have statistics and information that I can probably contribute and pepper in here, but overall, this is really going to be your show. So I don't know. Maybe we can start with just kind of like a general a definition of the topic of just abuse in general, and then if that leads into sexual abuse, how would somebody know if they're being sexually abused?
Well, just an overview. A broader view of tonight's topic is getting leadership, getting the Christian church to believe and understand what abuse is. Typically, right now, I believe if you sat down with most evangelical conservative pastors in our age range and you said, how do you define abuse? They would say that he hit her. And I think that's the line, because we've heard it in so many situations. Well, he hasn't done anything yet. The implication being until he does something, we don't have any evidence that there's a problem. And so I want to push back on that and to I think, point out some obvious things just about physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. There's the idea of spiritual abuse, which is just anytime you're wrapping up your abuse in spiritual authority and speaking on behalf of God, on guilt, all that kind of stuff. And then the one that I think it is very difficult to nail down is the sexual abuse and assault and coercion that can take place in a Christian marriage. And because of the things that we have been taught, it doesn't always look like it is what it is. So I want to explore some of those ideas. So currently, what the church, what most people in leadership will accept as concerning abuse is if he has crossed the line and he's physically hurt her. But I have seen also in that scenario where leadership has then still wanted to put things back together. And the idea that you are, 70% more likely to be killed if you go back than if you don't needs to be something they understand, because I'm appalled at how many times something like this happens and they're like, but it's just, we need to put the marriage together. It defies the pattern of human history that I'm making up numbers here. 90% of the time, people just don't change if they've had a pattern of doing this kind of a thing. And you don't want to take the chance. I just don't get why this is so hard. I had a pastor years ago who said once, especially for a man, once he crosses a line and he has hit somebody, not boxing, not that kind of thing, but just really hit them, especially if it's a woman, it's a line that will be forever harder to not cross because they've already gone there. So this idea that if it's happened, it's never going to happen again and I'm going to send her back. Say that a woman gets hit by her husband and they separate and then they get back together and he never hits her again. I'm not sure that there's still not a problem, because guess who knows she can't cross a certain line without getting hit? The wife. It's just something is severed and that needs to start being acknowledged instead of we don't see a bruise yet, or we do see a bruise, but it's more important to put the marriage back together.
There's an article I came across, a number of articles, of course, doing the research for everything. This article is called How Can Partnerships with Faith Communities Support Accountability and Hope for Those Who Cause Harm? And this is just a section of the article. It says here, over the years, faith leaders from around the U.S. have asked me how to respond to abusers. Many faith leaders, and like many people in the wider community, have been taken in by an abuser's charm and likability. Faith leaders say, quote, he said he was sorry, so I told her to go back home and get the family back together. Or, quote, he's the nicest guy when I'm around. Whenever I'm around, I'm sure he wouldn't hurt anyone. With little or no training or resources about abuse, faith leaders can be, as one said to me, suckers, quote, suckers for a good confession. As a result, well-meaning faith leaders may minimize the violence, silence, or blame the victim, and suggest unsafe options. Now, to frame everything with what you're saying right now and put some proof in the pudding, so to speak, there's I came across a white paper, and this was a research study from PubMed, and this was about non-fatal strangulation and is an important risk factor for homicide in women. So the entire paper was just strangulation data, okay? And the key points to bring out here is that non-fatal strangulation was reported in about 45% of attempted homicides and 43% of actual homicides. That the number, that's huge, okay? And then prior to non-fatal strangulation, it was associated with greater than 6-fold odds of becoming an attempted homicide, and then over 7-fold odds of actually becoming a completed homicide. Women, if you've been strangled once, you have a 7 times more likely chance of being murdered as a result of just that act, statistically speaking. That was very surprising to me. I didn't know it was that high. In 2012, it was found that 68% of a convenient sample of 62 women presenting from a domestic violence advocacy program reported strangulation by their abuser. The point with that is you're talking almost 70%. So whenever you have a physically abusive situation going on inside of a marriage, strangulation comes up. If you've been strangled once, just once, you're 6 times more likely to have an attempted homicide committed on you.
And to that, I would say it needs to be a black and white issue, in my opinion. I get it that everything's separate, but again, it is so incredibly likely that this person's never going to change. So if you have one time where somebody has physically hurt, I'd say the wife or the kids, that man needs to be out of the house. And that is it. You're done. Why is that so? Why is that not an obvious statement? So maybe most pastors, when I sit down, would acknowledge physical abuse. But I don't think it's taken seriously what a man says to his wife. And the things I've met with women before, and then somebody we both know will kind of come and talk to me, and they'll look a little like, are you really sure? Again, that's always the question. And I say, if you could hear the things that I know he has said to her, you would never think it's okay. But because people in leadership aren't hearing the actual things that are being said to women. I don't think they know how bad it is. And then let's say you do know. If you still think you're going to find a good guy in there after he says and does the things that he's saying and doing, you're wrong. And you need to stop saying that. Start seeing it earlier. I wrote this because we were preparing our notes or whatever. So it is essential that abuse in its seed forms be detected and addressed early. Stop waiting for a physical altercation. Move away from dismissing verbal, emotional, spiritual, and sexual abuse labels as being an overreaction. You not only leave people in terrible places by ignoring pattern behavior, but you also diminish the victim who later needs validation that something wrong was done, even if the physical blow never landed.
We have a culture that will put a dog in the adoption shelter or put it down based on the fact that they think it might harm the 3-year-old. Not based on the fact that the dog mauled the 3-year-old. They don't even wait for it to get that far. But yet when it comes to some of these other danger signs that we should be paying attention to as well, we don't use a similar level of discernment. We operate off of, well, he didn't mean it. We can make excuses. We can this, we can that. I don't think it's that hard not to threaten your wife. I just as like a par for the course regular day, that kind of thing.
And it's interesting when you've been in a situation, even like mine, I forget that is the bar. Like you think, well, this thing didn't happen. But to think about if a husband has said embarrassing or sexually degrading things about his wife to her or in front of her children or in front of others, I'm done. I think that's pull it right now. And I know most leadership would look at me and say, no. But if he's saying those things, that's telling you who he is. It's really not hard. I have had 3 kids for 24 years, and I do not struggle like to walk in a room and degrade them. That's never a struggle. So when it is happening, it needs to be
not
addressed.
Degrade them. It's not a struggle not to degrade them. Let's just clarify.
It's so easy, those kids.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Maybe that was a Freudian slip. Just saying. Something that isn't talked about is dysfunction in sex in the Christian marriage. That's not something people even know. And I think earlier before we started recording, I was asking Kelly if she had heard the same mantras that I had growing up in the Christian culture. I got married and I was explicitly told, I can't tell you who told me, but I remember thinking about it and knowing it was true, that my body no longer belonged to myself. That meant that at all times, anywhere, any place, any day, any time, I was to be open to being touched. If I didn't want to be, that would be something I remember retraining my mind going, well, now my body belongs to my spouse. And they don't deny that the verse says his body belongs to you. But men and women are different. And so that's not something that typically is especially in Christian marriages, like, oh, she just won't keep her hands off me. So I just don't think that's happening. This is something that women are told. And there is a lie in it that if you are always available and always open to having sex, that your husband won't be involved in pornography, he won't be interested in another woman, he won't commit adultery, and you will have done your Christian duty. So your duty is to be available at all times, several times, make sure it's almost a dictated amount of times in a week, and you don't have personal space anymore. That's not allowed.
Not only does it put the onus on the women in order to keep the marriage, quote unquote, healthy together, at least at a minimum in a sexual realm, but it also, there is no idea of like, it's only her. She has to be available. It's not like, the guy has to. The onus is always, it's only in one direction, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's definitely only going in one way.
And it's very formulaic. Like anything with marriage, if you find a book and it says this is the way to do it, you should be suspicious already, because every single partnership is unique. If every person in the body is unique and there's never been a part that is your part in the body, then that has to be true of your marriage as well. So for me in particular, being married to somebody and you discover that my personality is introverted and I'm private, then you cater your relationship in all aspects around one another. It can't be this, she has to be this, this, and this. I do have a thought I wrote down because I'm thinking this is harder to see. Maybe a Christian woman can think, well, if he pinned me down, beat me, and then made me have sex with him, that's rape. But I think that there's a couple of things I found in doing research. They finally put a name to what I think is going on. What I've seen in other women, what I experienced myself, is coercion. So if you're wanting to figure out what we're talking about after the episode ends, just Google Christian marriage, coercion, rape. Those ideas are going to come all out together. Something I wrote just as a way to get women to start thinking about whether this applies to them or not. A way to know you may be involved in a pattern like this in marriage is that you may be relieved in his absence, as it means you feel your body once again belongs to you. You may find you seek places like locked bathrooms or other guaranteed private spaces to ensure you will not be put into a pressured situation. Maybe that's too vague. I don't know. But I think that that's a signal to you, like you feel like your word isn't enough to stop something from happening, or your interests, and you've just had to been trained either by his bad moods or his doctrinal statements about sex, whatever it is. There's this training that has gone on that I don't have the option to not be interested. I don't have the option to say no. So if I'm behind a locked bathroom door, I can't be blamed later for saying no because I didn't have the opportunity because I locked the door. These are just some scenarios I don't know might trigger some people to think about the issue in their own regard. There is a quote I wanted to read as well. This is from an article titled "When Sex Becomes Abusive in Marriage" by Dr. Julie Slattery. Not all sexual abuse involves violence and physical coercion. Other forms of sexual abuse can include sexual humiliation and manipulation. Sexual abuse in any form is not simply about sex. It is also about power. Sexuality is a powerful force within a marriage relationship, and that power can be misused to inflict harm on the other person. Sexual abuse can include a spouse who makes inappropriate or unwanted sexual comments in public. It can include a spouse who uses sex to degrade or humiliate. The most common and overlooked form of sexual abuse involves manipulation and even spiritual themes to coerce a spouse to act sexually against her will. I don't think that that's something leadership, church pastors, I don't think they're thinking about this at all. And I actually know they're not, because if I say it, they're uncomfortable.
For just the average guy, I think probably one of the best associations that can be made, and I don't think it's a one-to-one, but I'm spitballing here. When the idea for a lot of guys going to prison, there's an overarching fear that is involved in that. I want you guys to imagine that that's your home life. That fear that you know what I'm talking about, that you just have it now, and that's just the way it is, and at no time do you have any idea when that's going to be demanded of you in that way. For the reason that you don't want to go to prison, that's what a lot of women are dealing with, and why they're locking themselves in the bathroom, so that they can have that moment of reprieve where at least that's something that's in their control. And
again, it's not even something I knew was happening until I was out. So I wish it were obvious, but especially when you've been raised in the church and you have that concept of that's what a good wife is, and then you don't realize that you do feel that it's a mood control thing, it's pressure, it's going beyond the boundaries you've stated, it's your space isn't your own, your time isn't your own, and all of those things, it's all under the guise of something you have adopted as a worldview. So therefore, when you do start to feel there's something wrong, you feel responsible for it, because I've made that decision to cooperate with that worldview. So therefore, what's been done to me is my own fault. And it's a very hard thing to unravel and take the pieces apart. But it is still, those things are still happening, and you know, because you want to be left alone.
There is a part of it too where this idea of being the good wife, it will be something that young women, I guess any woman, I suppose, could project out there in order to have that social acceptance, in order to alleviate the feeling of those social pressure without realizing that they're causing social pressure at the same time. These topics are complicated. It's not like they're villains by any stretch, but you can have a situation, and I am familiar with some of it because I do know some younger women, especially from youth group. My Times is doing youth group leadership, and some other people that are in Kelly in our lives, where they'll talk about things. I'll overhear things, or conversation will come up and be mentioned where it's not quite right, and it's just a little, something's just a little bit off, and you're kind of going, okay. You know, you almost want to go, you understand that that's not a reflection of a healthy marriage, right? Or that's not a reflection of a healthy attitude towards intimacy, right? Like, you almost want to say that, but, sometimes, it's not my place,
And you just don't always know. And that's the hard part, especially if you're raised in it. And I have seen it, unfortunately, sometimes in more the homeschool community schools, that there's this attitude towards the role of a woman that's very what we're talking about, very much that your call in life is to be a wife who is meeting all of his needs on every level at all times, to do it in a way which you sacrifice yourself is even more godly.
Eve was not Adam's milk cow. The word that God uses for Eve as a helper, that is a word that is used to describe God, especially in the time when Israel's in a time of war. This is not a passive, docile, something to be you like a vending machine. You go up and you get whatever you want from your vending machine and then put it back in the corner. Good, it's there for when I need it again. That is not what a wife is. That is not what a woman is, and it's just not.
And that's where the spiritual abuse aspect can be in there, because behind the statements, even if a leadership is saying it or a husband is saying it, behind those statements is your biblical perception of who you need to be, and you want to be walking the right way. You want to please the Lord, and therefore you just keep kind of following along. And like I said, that can almost make it difficult to see it's actually happening. There was another quote. Hopefully this will help people to see it too. It's from an article, Sexual Coercion. What is it? Does it happen in marriage? Is it justifiable? And what do we do with this information? The author wrote, unfortunately for some women, once a certain demeanor is perceived, they know to capitulate, for otherwise things will go badly for them. Women will capitulate to avoid bullying behavior, which is words, emotional abuse, mood swings, just put that one out, anger, volatility, couldn't say that, even self-righteous indignation. What we are talking about here is the genuine crossover into coercion, where one party, usually the woman, has sex without wanting to because they feel pressured into it once or as a repeated pattern. So if somebody at the beginning of their marriage, there's an emotional or physical recoil to the pattern that's being set, but you quickly are taught that there is a withdrawn, angry mood swings, displeasure with you, there's just a mood to it. Once you've learned that that's what's going to happen if you are not this readily available all the time, go for it lady, you settle into a pattern, which again makes it harder to see. But this is what's happening. And then if you get out of it and you're going back and you're looking and you're starting to recognize how you felt about it, you again feel the responsibility because it was something that became a pattern in your marriage. And I think that is something I want to put out there for leadership. I know we talked about it last week, that you need to not be judgmental of a woman who has not seen what patterns she's in, and that also do not judge somebody for what they instinctively had to do to survive. And I think this is that idea, because I'm still not able to assign blame to myself. Like, I still look at these things and go, well, I believe those things, and that's what I took into the marriage. And so But those things were capitalized on. And I know, because I felt these things, that I'm saying, hey, if you feel like you would really love to have time to yourself, and I don't mean to read a book, I mean just space, that's an indicator. I think it's something you should be paying attention to.
Just because somebody is a trusting person doesn't give you carte blanche free license to tell any lie you want to them in order to get them to do whatever you want. That is not the definition of a marriage. It is men have a responsibility to protect their wives and their children, and that also means even from them. And that, if that's the case, with me it is, it has been in the past, it probably will be in the future. I know who I am. I know what my volatility is. I know what, Jesus is working real slowly on my anger issues. You know what I mean? So it's like, I know who I am. And there are times when I can't allow that to happen. I can't allow, so, okay, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go get in the car and go for a drive, or I'm going to go pick up milk. We already have 3 gallons in the fridge. We're going to get a 4th, They
get ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely eat my feelings. So, sometimes there's that too.
Something that is a light switch thought in my head is I am surrounded with several peers who were also raised in this dialogue from the church, and they brought that in with spouses, their husbands, who had also been raised in it, and yet that didn't become something he exploited. So I think that can help people think about it. If you are a woman who feels this might be the pattern you were in or you are in, and you're kind of in that cycle of blame because it feels like something you've agreed with, even though you don't want to on some level, that's your clarity, that you can look at your spouse and say, we may have been boiled in the same pot of theology and this perception of sex in marriage, but if he's exploiting it, then that's just who he is. That is his fault then, because plenty of good men have been raised in this and get married and look at their wife and don't treat her like an object.
Up until very recently in the United States, they had these laws on the books. And the idea of marital rape is a new concept. Legally, just in culture in general. There's this article, and kind of gave a historical background to it. It said the legal doctrine that a man cannot be prosecuted for raping his wife has pervaded English common law for over 2 centuries. This concept is rooted in the writings of Sir Matthew Hale. He was a Chief Justice in the UK. He a noted 18th century jurist and misogynist who achieved notoriety for presiding over trials of witches who were frequently hung. In 1973, Lord Hale gave birth to the marital exemption doctrine when he wrote, "The husband cannot be guilty of rape committed by himself upon his lawful wife. For by this mutual matrimonial consent and contract, the wife hath given up herself in this kind unto her husband, which she cannot retract. In marriage, she hath given up her body to her husband." Although Lord Hale cited no authority for this statement, which was asserted in a treatise, the concept was accepted without question as part of the common law by American courts. So this came over the seas that way into America. Legislators and criminal law experts, the irrevocable This irrevocably implied consent theory was buttressed by traditional common law doctrine that a woman was her husband's property. Until relatively recent times, her legal existence was held to be, quote, incorporated and consolidated into that of her husband. The first American case to formally recognize the marital exemption was decided by Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts in 1857, a dictum that stated the case that a marriage to the victim would always be a defense of rape. Decisions by courts in other states were quick to incorporate the reasoning of the Massachusetts court. The marital exemption endured virtually intact in this country for over 100 years. Then, in 1978, a supermarket checkout clerk, Gloria Rideout, accused her husband of rape under the Oregon Reform Statute. Although John Rideout was acquitted, the question of whether a man had the right to rape his wife had been finally unleashed. It wasn't until 1993 that the last state finally got rid of the marital exemption clause regarding being prosecutable for raping your wife.
In 2013, there was an FBI redefinition of what rape is. That was something that someone had said to me several years ago when we were examining a case where it had been a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. There had been moments of, or sex in the beginning had been consensual, but then there was all these threads. And as the situation is being described more and more, I thought, this feels familiar. This is how I felt. So I said, no, I don't know what to call what she's describing, but it's wrong, and you need to treat it like it's wrong. And at that point, it was when I learned that the FBI had redefined. And if you look it up and you say the 2013 FBI redefinition, it comes up. But one of the things they put is it included offenses where physical force was not involved. So I think it's just not something the church is looking at. I feel like I'm saying that over and over and I'm banging my head on the wall. But I guess my hope with this episode is honestly not that leadership hears it. It's that women hear it, because they'll never go talk to their leadership. So there has to be a place where you can hear it and think, I think they're talking about something I've experienced.
So what are some questions that somebody could ask, like if a friend comes to you or a woman comes to you for guidance or whatever? What are some questions you could ask to see if this is what's happening behind closed doors? I know sometimes it's just very obvious when they start talking, but
I did make a list of those types of things that might be common. I don't know. There's a nervousness about sex because there's either always been a pressure to do more than your comfort level, or there's an attitude in his approach that makes you sense it's satisfying a fantasy from porn. Obviously, not all friends can go up to another friend and just say, hey, is that how you feel? But I do think that if you're examining that for yourself, that's something you can take a moment, think back to your sexual experiences with your spouse, and is there that component there? Do you feel like there's some sense of pornographic play out going on? That's more common than people know. He may ridicule an emotion that arises during sex, either a woman who might have a moment where she doesn't want to have sex anymore, or she's crying, or she's freezing. That will frustrate him, not induce him to kindness. I think that would be something to look for. Sex, if in their relationship sex is treated as an obligation, then it's going to feel like something that needs to be done to keep him happy with life or with the relationship. The wife might feel objectified, seen separately from the relationship and there to be used. So in that regard, it would feel like the only value she brings is the sexual component, and everything else is subpar to that. So I heard that quite a few times from women, and I think we mentioned it last week. I think there's a handbook going out there, of things that evil men say to their wives, because I hear this over and over. Your job is to make sure I'm sexually satisfied. That is simply your only responsibility. I don't even love you. I just think that is the only thing you're supposed to do. That is why you're in my life. That's not okay. That's not something a woman should be told. He may express anger for not getting enough sex, further enforcing that sex is security for the relationship and mood control. Your space may not feel like your own. That's kind of like the bathroom locked thing. But more than that, you don't feel like your body is your own. And I think that's, again, that principle that's come from the church. You would feel like you don't control when, where, and how.
What about name calling? Is that something a wife may hear from a husband, or vice versa, I guess? But
Yeah, but not in the way you think. I think being accused of being prudish, vanilla, not whore-like enough, not as good as other women, that kind of thing, that comes out more. I think in angrier parts, when things maybe are more confrontive in the marriage, definitely called names. That happens. That's been an experience. So, yeah. That's the thing, is you can talk to other people in other relationships and you can say, this was done and it was uncomfortable for me. And that person may not think that's uncomfortable in their sexual relationship. That doesn't matter, because if it's uncomfortable for you, that should matter in your unique marriage. But there can be these on the line things that you're like, well, I don't know. I guess that's what everybody's like, or every relationship has these kinds of moments.
That's also, it's up for that married couple to decide. I remember I've said to, the kids in youth group and stuff, as they move, look at their future ahead of them, the idea that, look, if you can't talk about sex, then you are not mature enough and responsible enough to even have it. So, and that goes for if you're married as well. If you can't talk about the subject and you can't interact with it appropriately, in what your hopes are, what your likes and dislikes are, or however that works. The problem with the subject is that there is a little bit of a gray area on certain edges. And what I mean by that is this. If you have a young couple and they've never been intimate with anyone, and their first opportunity for sexual activity is on their wedding night, nobody knows what they like and what they don't like. You find out what you don't like by finding out what you don't like. And so, but you have to have that area and that place where you have the maturity that you can discuss it and you can talk about it. And you're not worried about having somebody, their temper get out of control, or you're not feeling the social pressure that goes along with it. If you know it's not okay to say, you know what, this thing, I'm not okay with doing that. I don't want to do that anymore. That's not comfortable for me, or whatever the term is. And you can't say that without it being an argument, without it being you're already in a danger level situation, or in a red flag zone. At a bare minimum, a red flag zone.
And it can look like he might say, oh, that's okay. But then pressure over time, pressure, varying forms of pressure. And then the boundary gets crossed because you have been told that this is how you are a good wife. And that plays into that. That is something that came up in my own situation, was my ex-husband's justification for the years of pornography, where it was research. It was required research. And every time that was said to certain men in certain places of leadership, they would say, every couple has this arena where they can figure out what works in their marriage. And it was always, that's an accurate answer. That's true. But when you're dealing with somebody who is not healthy, that creates an environment where you think what you've said already at that point is not good enough. So being just completely blunt, using an example, if you got married and you are two believers and one says, I will only ever have sex this one way, and the other person says, okay, I agree, and they are together for the next 50 years, that's okay. But that's not what we're told is okay. Because, one, the primacy of the sexual relationship in marriage, the attention it's given and the importance and the place it's given is out of proportion to the rest of the marriage. So if I were to say that to a young Christian guy, would he balk? If I said, no, you can only have one way of having sex the rest of your married life, is that a deal breaker? Should it be? I don't think it should. If you're dealing with a spouse who has that limitation, I think you accept that limitation and say, if at any time you change your mind, let me know, and you move on from there. Is that fair to say? Because you're a guy, so is that fair?
I think that it's when it comes to, I think I want to backtrack just a little bit. I think one of the reasons it's easy for pastors to be like, oh, was there violence? That's the hard line. Because there's a hard, clear line on something. There's some gray areas when it comes to people conducting themselves in their own marriage the way that they are. Kelly and I are we have like 90s style Gen X cruel senses of humor with each other. We're a little bit mean when we joke around with each other. We're mean, but it's funny, and that's also been our relationship. For almost 20 years now. Other people will hear that and they might think we're fighting or we're mad at each other or something like that. We're not. It's just us. It's just the way that we do it, So you got to take into account some of that stuff. Getting back to what you were saying, if somebody's term and condition is we're only having sex in this way, only one way. Okay, in the highly unlikely possibility that's the situation, yeah, if the guy agrees to it, you need to agree to it then. You know what I'm saying? Like, this isn't like, oh, well, she doesn't really mean that. No, she means it. Like, if she says, I'm never going to cook a meal for you, don't fill in the blank in parentheses with, she probably doesn't mean it, of course she'll cook. Then get married to her and be surprised when she never cooks a meal. Like, if what you want is someone who's a little bit more sexually adventurous or willing to be Indiana Jones with you and explore uncharted territory or whatever, okay, there are people out there that are like that. They want to live life a little bit more fuller, but within the safety and the confines of a healthy marriage. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not what we're talking about. We're ultimately talking about situations where people are abusive. They're already bringing deception into it before they get married. They're saying they're okay with one thing, but in the back of their head, they're saying, you know what, I'll just push her. I'll just cross that boundary. It'll be fine. When we're married, she has to do what I say anyways.
And it can be more coercive over time, too. It can be an earning system, basically building that trust, building a rapport, and then it sounds so weird to say, but I think it can foggily be, well, I did this for you, why don't you do this for me? And that's like a transactional thing in that relationship. Going back to the statement about if you have an agreement when you're first married, what I think a man should have as its disposition in the courtship time, I hate that word, but the courtship time, is that isn't the most important thing about my future spouse. I love her. I want to spend my life with her as my partner. If that's the boundary, that's the boundary. But that's not how it's even perceived in the church. The church has a pre-programmed formula for men that their sexual needs are the tone. They need to be met, and that's it.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that because some listeners would probably be like, oh, well, it's not like that anymore. But it is. That's not that long ago. I had a medical condition that ruled out any kind of activity between husband and wife for quite a few months that it happened. And I was told by a Bible study leader, well, you have to make sure you're taking care of him. You have to make sure you're doing something so that he is pleased and he's released. It did not matter that I medically could not and should not because of the pain and discomfort. It was like, nope, you have to make sure he's taken care of. Not me, not the one who was ill, but him.
That is something else if you're trying to go, well, is this a problem or not? It won't. It doesn't matter if you're sick. It doesn't matter if you've had a baby. It doesn't matter if you're recovering from a surgery. It doesn't matter if you have a health condition, emotional condition, your parent died. It does not matter. It's when he wants it, where he wants it, how he wants it. And whether he says it politely or not, if that's the coercion you're feeling, that's how you know you're in a bad place.
I'll say this very flatly and very bluntly. For men, you want to know if you're ever like, I wonder if I'm unhealthy. I wonder if I'm on the edge of psycho. Here's how you can know. When you literally don't care at all about your wife's experience and whether or not she's interested in accepting or receiving you. If that's not a factor at all, if that's not actually in the forefront, I am with Kelly, I want to make sure that I'm accepted and received before we even move into that area of things. That's paramount, because not only the responsibility that I have towards, once again, to protect her even from me if that's the case, but because it's the structure and the nature of not only how women are in how they show up in the world, but how healthy men show up as well. The idea of inflicting another person with me, that's something, quite frankly, you do with an enemy, or somebody that, like, you got to protect against, like an outside attacking force or something like that. That's not the way you should interact with the person that you have chosen to spend your life with. It shouldn't even be on the table. And there's a part of me that I get to a point, the older I get, the more I'm oddly dumbfounded by stuff like this. Like, what do you mean people are that way? I know, of course they are. I know that they are. But that's not normal. The fact that I feel weird even saying that out loud now, like, that's not normal behavior. Your wife is supposed to really, really like you and really, really, really want to be with you. And like, that's supposed to be super awesome. And there's a look that they have in their eyes where it's like you're being accepted and it feels really good. It's like super great. I almost can't believe I have to say that out loud. There have to be Christian marriages where that's never gone on, and there's a guy has no idea what I'm talking about.
I think what happens over the long term when you're with a person who does approach their wife that way, what is revealed is how she feels. By the end of it, you are only good for one thing, and that is it. And so if that's how he enters the marriage, that is what will play out, whether it's the long game or the short game. At the end of the day, it is about just that. And so he literally doesn't care if it's received or not received, because it isn't about sex. It's about power.
There are more than one way to kill a human being. Mm-hmm. And you can do it physically, strangulation, for example, with the example I gave earlier. Or you can do it in the way you just mentioned, where you chip away at them, the piece of them, who they actually are, on the deepest, most intimate level possible. And you do it again and again, over and over. And over the course of 5 years, 10, 15, maybe 30, however resilient a person is, eventually they go away. They're not there anymore. Whatever it is that's left, it is a shell, a shadow, or a husk of the former person they used to be. And that's a tragic. The fact that it's even overlooked or seen as just normal inside of any kind of Christian environment it's a travesty, to say the least. If not, it's outright unacceptable. And
what becomes, like I said earlier, there's a way in which, if they're really good at it, that they leave the wife or the woman so confused about what part she thinks is her fault that it is impossible to not look at that area of her life without feeling embarrassment and shame, which further reduces her sense of value and her freedom to find somebody to talk to about it. And so it is the destruction of a person, and that doesn't end. That is an incredibly damaging thing, to take advantage of the vulnerability of somebody in the sexual relationship. It is the most damaging. It's why in some marriages that I've dealt with, it doesn't show up there first, because that's where a man can gain your trust and your regard. And if he doesn't abuse you there, he's not going to abuse you anywhere else. And it'll kind of work backwards, and it'll come back to being in the bedroom, but it doesn't necessarily start there. And it's just such a vulnerable place, emotionally for anyone, but for women especially. To exploit that is very, very long-lasting sorrow.
I've seen a lot of stuff over the years, and one thing that I have seen that has permanently made a mark on me, I have seen a woman's face, her eyes, her body, the language of it, the way she has crumpled into herself, with the thought of being harmed this way. For men, it's different, I guess, to say on a certain level. When I think of maybe the idea that I'm going to be harmed, I think I'm going to be punched. I think I'm going to be physically attacked, or something more like that, something more fight-oriented. When women think of being harmed, I'm going out on a limb, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think them getting into a fist fight is the first thing that comes to mind. If they're walking alone in a parking lot, out of, I guess if shopping malls even exist anymore, but at 9 o'clock at night or whatever, they're not thinking somebody's going to jump out of the bushes and start fist fighting me. It's different. I've seen the look on a person when they're in that situation. It's absolutely horrifying. It is horrifying to know not only the ramifications. They're not in a dangerous situation at the moment, but they are because they're inside their head. They're inside the moment. They're reliving what it is that they're reliving. And to know that that is an actual real thing that has happened, whatever the details are, to cause that, I don't even need to know the details, but to see that type of reaction, it's very, very awful. And for any church to say, no, that's not, it's not like he's hitting her, the coercion's not a real thing. It's not. It always escalates. It always goes up. There's always something. And look, Dan, our courts are great, innocent till proven guilty. They need to stay that way, quite frankly. But there are some things, it's not innocent until proven guilty. There are some things that are accusation. Let's sort it out and let's find out what's going on and get some therapy involved and start asking some questions, that kind of thing. It's just rough, man. I don't know. What do you do when you're a guy? You're just sitting down seeing this stuff happen, and it's like,
you do a podcast.
I guess. Talk about it at least and let other people know that this is the kind of thing that's going on.
I agree. I hope, again, we've said a lot of times during the episodes that we hope people are listening. I think I said it earlier. Yes, I want leadership to hear this, but I want women to hear it because it's more than likely somebody listening will have had the experience, and at least there's one place that seemed to describe it well. And hopefully that's helpful.
I do want to say one thing real quick before we go on, that it is other women in the church teaching the young women this behavior, and that this is what's acceptable and this is what's expected of you. So I just want that to be clear. Like, women, we are doing this to ourselves and to each other, and we need to be aware of what a healthy marital bed looks like and what a healthy relationship looks like, and just the love and comfort and intimacy that's supposed to be in that moment, and not fear, guilt, obligation, shame, anything.
And on that too, if a woman tells another woman, don't diminish it if it seems small. If somebody really thinks that something's happening, you have to start trusting that instead of being like, well, maybe you just need to be more adventurous, or maybe you're just a prude, or all of those things. Just, I think women need to look out for other women.
So if after hearing what it is that we have had to talk about today, if you've gone from, I think everything's fine, to I might have some problems in my life that I need some help with. Once again, there is a national domestic violence hotline that you can call. That's 1-800-799-7233. 1-800-799-7233. So if you're in that situation, you need help, that's a place to start. That's an absolute place to start. So thanks for sticking with us for this entire episode. It's not easy talking about some of this stuff, and we do appreciate you hanging in there, and hopefully you've had your eyes open to some things that are going on. If you want to reach out to either Laura or I or Kelly, and you can do so at naughtyversusnice at gmail.com. That's naughty, VERSUS, nice at gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.